I thought the way that Sinners reinvents vampires was absolutely genius. I love vampire movies, I love vampires as creatures, and I love seeing how different filmmakers can reinterpret the vampire to tell different stories. And there's certainly no shortage of them in popular culture. There are dozens and dozens of vampire movies and TV shows. But the change that Ryan Coogler makes to vampires in his movie Sinners is one of the most interesting that I've seen. Even though we've seen so many different versions of vampires, culturally we're still sort of wedded to the 19th century version of them. Whenever you think of a vampire, your first image is probably of some old guy dressed in a big black gown, a nice shirt, living in a big castle. If you're going to go as a vampire for Halloween, you're probably going to dress like a count from the 1800s. And that depiction of vampires is still really important to how we understand them as monsters, because the subtext of those stories and of that time is that they weren't just monsters, but they were rich landlords who were literally feeding on the poor. Conscious or unconscious, the idea of the rich exploiting the poor is central to our idea of the vampire. Now, when Ryan Coogler sets his vampire movie in 1930s Mississippi, the iconography is obviously very different. There's no castles for the vampires to hide in, there's no flowing black cloaks, but class exploitation is still a pretty central idea, but because of this place and because of this time, it becomes racial. And that alone would have been a really interesting angle for this movie to explore with the vampires. They don't just look down on the main characters in this movie because of their family background or because they have less money. They view them as racially inferior. But Coogler gives the vampires another motivation here as well. They don't just want to feed on their blood, they want to take their culture as well. One of the main characters in this movie, Sammy, plays the guitar. It's his dream to become a blues musician. Now, you may know that back in the day, the conservative right called the blues music the devil's music. And so the movie really plays with those two forces. On one side, the blues is a source of joy and of liberation, and on the other side, it's looked at with scorn and associated with the devil. And so the movie plays with those two things literally, where music is a thing that binds people together across culture, across time, but it's also the thing that draws the vampires to them. And so for Ryan Coogler's vampires, they don't just want the people, they want their music, they want their culture, they want their identity. And that just makes the vampires in this movie so much more sinister to me. Like, it's one thing for a movie to show vampires killing people or sucking their blood. You know, it's another thing for movies to say that vampires are taking someone's soul. For them to literally want to feed off their art, off their cultural expression, it feels like so much more violating. I thought it was just absolutely genius because it stays true to the classic tropes of the vampire, but just deepens it even further. Now, with me saying it like that, it makes the movie sound like it's really artsy-fartsy and pretentious, but part of why the movie works so well is because it delivers on all the genre stuff. It still delivers on vampires doing classic vampire stuff. Part of the fun of the movie is how strictly they adhere to those classic vampire rules. You know, vampires have to be invited inside. They really don't like garlic, and it leads to some really fun sequences. What makes Ryan Coogler really smart as a filmmaker is that he doesn't give you all of that right away. I'm not gonna lie, during the start of this, I kept being like, where's the vampire stuff? Came here to see the vampire stuff, and it does take a minute to get there, but it's so smart because what they're doing is they're setting up the character and the world of this movie. They really ground this movie in a place and time, and there's so much space to develop the characters, their hopes, their dreams. When the vampires in this movie are set up to not just be class-based predators or racial predators, they're cultural predators, the movie needs the time to let you soak up the culture of its world. And so by the time you do get to the genre of vampire stuff, the stakes feel so much higher. I thought this movie was fantastic. If you've seen it, let me know what you thought in the comments. And if you want to make sure you don't miss anything coming up on the channel, make sure to subscribe.